You don't seem autistic. The intended compliment from those who do not know me that I'm forced to accept with a tight smile and a silent nod of the head. Sometimes I go so far as to thank them, and each time I feel the bile rise up in my throat as the knowledge that I am betraying myself settles somewhere in the pit of my stomach. But the mask that I've molded does not slip, and the theatrical smile remains firmly in place as I conceal beneath it my own identity. It took many years to craft this mask, the mask that I dare remove only at the end of the day once I'm locked within my room, far away from the criticism of others. My instinctive behavior as an autistic person has never been looked upon favorably, and I spent a childhood berated for it by my parents, by teachers, by friends, by strangers. This was not aided by the fact that I did not receive a diagnosis until I was 18. I was just thought to be an odd child. This is the case for many people, girls in particular with autism. My story is not one of incident. I'm fortunate enough never to have been a victim of a hate crime, nor have I been subjected to obvious discrimination at school or in the workplace. But I and many other autistic people regularly encounter incidents involving a general misunderstanding of our behavior and an expectation that we behave in a way that is unnatural for us in order to make those around us feel more comfortable, often enforced by cruel or dismissive words and social exclusion should we allow ourselves to behave as we would do without societal expectations. It is my hope that in hearing some of my experiences, you'll take a moment to consider your own behavior before you judge the atypical behavior of others, whether they have disclosed a disability to you or not. You are being cruel. Imagine how they feel. I was often spoken to firmly at school for what turned out to be a lack of cognitive empathy. Autism affects different people differently, so I speak only of my own experiences when I say I've never been particularly good at interpreting behavior and language of others to gauge their emotions. Even when I learned to recognize the telltale signs of particular moods, I often struggled to empathize if the reason was not something I had personally experienced. I earned a reputation of being cold and aloof at school because I could not stand to be with others when they cried if I did not immediately understand and relate to the reason. And this, of course, did not make me favorable among my peers. So, to avoid making others uncomfortable, I learned to mimic the behavior and language of my peers. I began to mask. You're being over emotional. It's just a bug. I regret I'm doing little to dispel stereotypes about autistic people as I recount situations in which I have been misunderstood, as at least with regards to emotions, I match several otherwise ill-constructed media representations of autistic people. However, in regards to effective empathy, I have always experienced what is sometimes called hyper-empathy towards animals. This means that I feel more strongly towards them than others might do. There is one example which I feel best epitomizes this for me. I was about 9 at the time. My shower had an internal window ledge, but it always filled with water when the shower was in use. A small fly, a storm fly perhaps, flew into this small puddle, and despite my best attempts to save it by scooping it up and carrying it outside with shampoo still in my hair and the first towel I could find, it had already drowned. I spent the rest of the day alone in my room, completely nonverbal, feeling both personally responsible for the death of the fly, if only I'd waited half an hour for my shower, and mourning a death that, were I not autistic, would have had zero impact upon me. My mother was most unimpressed with my behavior and told me that I was far too old to get upset about such a silly thing. So, to avoid making others uncomfortable, I learned to suppress the strong feelings I had towards animals, and in particular, their suffering. I began to mask. You're being rude. Come and eat lunch with your friends. This was a favourite of my teachers when I sought to eat away from my peers. Whilst autistic people in the media are often depicted as being distressed by loud noises, which many are, My personal experience is different. Quiet, perfectly human sounds cause me an extraordinary amount of distress. I once had a neurotypical person attempt to relate my sensory experience by saying that they did not like the sound of nails on a blackboard, but this is an entirely inaccurate comparison. Sensory overload tends to go beyond mere unease or discomfort. Certain sounds, such as that of people eating, cause me physical pain, which cannot be soothed until I'm far away from the source of it or have incredibly loud music playing over headphones. This is not an issue with my ears, but with the way my brain processes certain sounds. And many autistic people will be negatively affected by a variety of sensory triggers, and some are positively affected by certain sensory stimuli. I lose almost all control of my behavior when in sensory overload. However, my peers were not keen to sit with me while I shot uncontrollable glares in their direction, as they did nothing more than eat, or whilst I physically clawed at my ears in a frantic attempt to block the sounds. And my teacher believed that it was something I would grow out of and insisted that I eat lunch with others. So, to avoid making others uncomfortable, I learned to ignore and suppress all these negative reactions caused by sensory stimuli, the fury, the floods of tears, the physical pain. I began to mask. I would like to note here that whilst all masking is an exhausting experience, I spend each waking moment pretending to be someone I am not. Masking sensory overload is a particularly harmful experience. I learned the hard way that suppressing such feelings resulted in very large meltdowns. The feelings had to come out one way or another. Still, it is more acceptable for me to have these meltdowns in the privacy of my home than it was to sit with my hands over my ears on the bus. I continue to mask. There are countless other examples I could give you, but as I draw my story to a close, two of my favorite misunderstandings go hand in hand. Vaccines cause autism, and can't it be cured? Regardless of your beliefs on whether or not vaccines do cause autism, it is often considered to be quite insulting that a risk of death from disease is preferable to autism. Similarly, asking if there is a cure is equally insulting. Whilst I've detailed my negative experiences above, autism is part of my identity. My brain functions differently to that of a neurotypical person. When something catches my interest, I quickly become invested and can learn a lot in a very short amount of time. My perfectionism, which for me personally is a way to manage my anxiety, means that I'm very detail oriented. This is a bonus trait for me as I study law. I work best in a routine, which means that I always meet deadlines through the use of a strict timetable and never miss a meal. It is these things which define me as much as my stereotypically negative traits, and my autism is a part of me which cannot be cured and which, truthfully, I would not cure however much I mask. And if your child is diagnosed with autism, take the time to understand them, make them feel comfortable with who they are. It takes a while to get there. As I hope these examples have demonstrated, voicing dislike for odd but harmless behaviour can have quite a negative impact on a person with a disability such as autism, sometimes going beyond feeling them, making them feel excluded and isolated, and having a serious effect on their mental health. The lack of awareness and understanding surrounding all disabilities, not only autism, but also mental health difficulties, leaves disabled people feeling ostracised, and when attempts are made to include them, the patronization, "You're so brave," and misunderstanding, "You don't seem autistic," can almost be as hurtful and harmful as the outright exclusion. Just because I've not experienced a hate crime, just because I've not been denied a job, and just because I've not been called derogatory names relating directly to my condition, this does not mean that I have not experienced intolerance with regard to my disability. Statistics may show progress. More disabled people in permanent housing, more disabled people in employment, less disabled people experiencing hate crimes. But the everyday ignorance of others impedes this progress, fueling the age-old stigmas surrounding disabilities and preventing disabled people from being true to themselves. I certainly hope that one day I will be brave enough to drop my mask.